Here we go. So we are in chapter 45. It's on page 583 if you're looking in your Sefer, in your book. I'll be pulling it up on the Kindle in just a moment. Just a little intro this is from the map of the Tanya that was created by Rabbi Shais Taub. He puts a little title to each chapter. So he titles this as Compassion for the Plight of the Soul. And he writes a little blurb about the chapter where he says the soul descended from the loftiest heights to be trapped in a body in this coarse world. Sin exacerbates this exile, and by extension, the exile of God's presence. So, I guess we'll see it inside, but when we do, our soul is being trapped in this world in our body, and every time a negative thing is being done, it intensifies the exile, and the exile of God's presence is being felt is stronger by every time a negative action, a sin is being performed. So on that, we should have compassion for our soul, for our dear neshama that's taken from such a lofty level and thrown into such a stinky dungeon that you have to have compassion for your soul and for God's divine presence that's also feeling that exile. And this compassion is an incredible meditation that is able to lead a person into a pretty incredible place. So, till now, we were talking about different types of emotions, always centered around the emotion of love, which is more on the right side, and awe, reverence, or in Hebrew known as yira, which is Kabbalistically known to be more on the left side of a person, right? We've given this example many times. When a person disciplines, it should be with their weaker side, right? Their embrace, their love should be with their right side. Actually, when we give charity, we always give with the right hand for a person who's a righty. For a left person, they would give with their left hand, which is the right, which is their right. But for most people, a person would give charity with their right. And in fact, by the Rebbe, many times the Rebbe would give with his right, and he would want the person receiving it to also receive with their right, which is a channel of love to love, from chesed to chesed, from ava to ava. If the person was a lefty, they would then receive it with their left hand. So that's the side of love, which we've been talking about, the emotion of love and the meditation surrounding that emotion. Then we started chapter 41 with the meditation around reverence and awe and fear of God. Now we're going to go more to the center or the combination of the two of them, which is going to be rachamim or compassion. So Kabbalistically, this is the third emotion. After you have chesed, which is kindness and love, you have yira, which is discipline and awe and reverence. Then you have the middle, which is going to be compassion, and actually it's also known as beauty. And we're going to see why. What's beauty? And in short, I'll just tell you: when you have combination of two things, it creates a mosaic. It creates something beautiful. So the way it's brought in many places in Chassidus is when a person has a sweater. It could be a beautiful, expensive cashmere sweater, but if it's one color, it's just a nice sweater. When it's colorful, which means when it's a blend of different colors, that's considered a beautiful sweater. In Torah concepts, it's taken art is when you have a combination, a blend of many colors together. That's what makes, whether it's a mosaic, when it's fusing different things together, whatever it is, when it's different. Adina did a beautiful a mezuzah. It was called the glass fusion, which ladies came and they fused these incredible colors, and everyone, they didn't think theirs will come out beautiful, but when it gets fused together, it all of their mezuzah cases, their glass mezuzah cases, they came out stunning. It was like so beautiful. It looks like absolute talent, because when you have many colors that are fused together, it creates something beautiful. So over here, the idea of compassion is a mix or a fusion of both love and also reverence. When you have the two together, it leads to a middle ground, which is called compassion, which is something so beautiful because it's a blend or a mix of different emotions. Just because in the Torah portions that we're in now, we are just on the cusp of the end of Abraham's life and going on to the life of of Yitzchak, and from Yitzchak, in this week's Torah portion, he gives birth to his wife Rivka, gives birth to Yaakov. So really, you have the combination of the three patriarchs that, in general, out of the three patriarchs, if I were to ask you to rate which one was the best, which one do you think, Vivian, is the top of the three patriarchs? Which one would you say?
I don't want to say the wrong answer. I would just say Jacob, maybe, because the last one.
Awesome, and that's actually the correct answer. Yaakov is known as the Bechir Shabbavis. He's known as the best out of the patriarchs. Abraham was absolute love, but as a result of his absolute love, sometimes I went to the wrong place. Yitzchak was reverence, justice. The person got what they deserved, but because of that, people who maybe were undeserving and didn't get any of it were feeling left out. They wanted a little bit of a free gift, and they didn't get it. Yaakov was the perfect blend of both of them. So Yaakov is known as the Bechir Shabbavis, the elite, the top of the patriarchs. And because he took from both of his father and his grandfather, he was the blend of both of them together. So while Avram was known as a man of chesed, a man of kindness, Yitzchak was known as a man of gevura, a man of justice, discipline. Yaakov was known as a man of compassion. Or in other words, he's known as truth. And all these words of compassion, harmony, beauty, and truth is all going to be, it's all going to be coming together in this chapter, which is the blend of a few emotions coming together. So the meditation we're going to be focusing on in chapter 45 is going to be one of compassion for our soul that is feeling so exiled from its pristine palace where it came from to the smelly dump that it ended up in. So let's see it inside. Chapter 45. I pull it up now on the Kindle. Share the screen. And we should be good to go. Are you guys able to see the screen? It's working. Awesome. Section 1, why your soul deserves compassion. From chapter 41 until this point, the Tanya has taught us various meditations aimed at achieving reverence and love of God. In this chapter, we will focus on a third emotion, which is compassion. Also, there is a straightforward way for a person to observe Torah and mitzvahs authentically with real emotions for God, a method which has reached us from the Baal Shem Tov. So this method was taught us from the Baal Shem Tov, and this is through awakening the emotional attribute associated with our father Yaakov, Jacob, of blessed memory, like Vivian said, which is the quality of compassion. You can do this by first, before the observance of a mitzvah, stirring in your mind a great deal of compassion before God over the spark of godliness that gives life to your soul, which has descended from its origin in the source of all life, which is the blessed infinite one, who fills all worlds and transcends all worlds, and in his presence everything is considered zero. And that spark of godliness became enmeshed with the body, which is compared to the primordial serpent's skin, which is far from the light of the king's face, as far as can be. For this world is an extreme expression of the vulgar klipos, etc. Okay, so let's just stop there for a second. We know there's what's the actor's name? Zero Mostel. Anyone heard of him? So he's a Jewish guy that grew up in the Bronx.
I saw him on Fiddler on the Roof.
Oh, there you go. So
back in the 60s.
In the 60s. Oh, you saw him like in okay, awesome. So
I saw him on Broadway.
On Broadway, very cool.
Yeah.
So his birth name was actually Shmuel Leib or something. And the reason, or I don't know if how this is what I heard, is where did he get the name Zero? Like, who names themselves Zero? What I heard is that he had an uncle that I guess, didn't get along with him or whatever, and he would always call him, "You're a zero. You're a nobody." So he wanted to prove his uncle right by, this famous actor. He changed his name to Zero, a reminder that he's a nobody. But it's an important thing, from this nobody, what he became. So over here, we're talking about realizing that everything of what we have, everything is considered zero in God's presence. It's in Hebrew, the word is ayin. So if you meditate, when you do a mitzvah, to have compassion on your soul, realizing that the spark that you have, that is giving life to you, your soul that you have, it's coming from God, coming from a place of infinity, from a place that it fills all worlds, in a place where everything is considered zero, the place of where the source of worlds come from. All of this is nothing. And now the spark of godliness is coming to this world that's taking on a serpent's skin, which is the idea of our animal soul and our body. And the light of God, which has been so illuminating, now is coming into a place of klipa, a place of this world. So now we're going to continue inside, and your compassion will be especially profound when you recall your own bad ways and your doings, all your actions, spoken words, and thoughts you have carried out since the day you were born, which were not good. So think of all the negativity that a person has done. The fact that your soul is trapped in your body would be pitiful even if you had never sinned. The thought of all your actions, spoken words, and thoughts you have carried out since the day you were born, which were not good, makes the compassion all the more intense. So far, what we have until now is the compassion on your soul, knowing that it was coming from such a pristine place and is going to such a place of vulgar klipas. And think of all the things that you made your soul have to go through, from all your actions you did, words you said, and thoughts that you had. It just brings about a great deal of compassion for your neshama, for your soul. Okay, section 2, the exile of the Shekhinah in your soul. So now, besides for the soul itself, the exile of your soul, there's also the Shekhinah, which is God's divine presence. Since your soul, which is one with God, is trapped in your body, it is as if God is trapped too, so to speak. And even a king is captivated by your flowing hair. In Hebrew, the words are Melech Asur Bar Hatim, which is a quote from Song of Songs. In the Song of Songs, the bridegroom describes his bride as being so striking in beauty that even a king would be captivated by your flowing hair, which in Hebrew is Rahatim. So the Tikkun Zohar interprets Rahatim as flow of the mind. Okay, so far what we know is that you can have a bride that is so beautiful that the way her groom describes her flowing hair, as that even a king would be captivated by your flowing hair. But the Hebrew word of hair, flowing hair, could also be flow of the mind. What does that have to do with us? The Tanya combines the literal and Zoharic interpretations together to suggest that the king God is captivated, which over here means trapped, so to speak, by the inappropriate thoughts of your mind, in which your holy soul is enmeshed. Contemplating how you have trapped God in such a way, causing the exile of the Shekhinah, divine presence, ought to evoke more compassion. So just to summarize this idea, the Tanya combines the literal meaning of Solomon's in in Song of Songs, with the Kabbalistic interpretation that the king is captivated by your flowing hair. The flowing hair is actually referring to what flows from the mind, what flows from the head, which is the mind. And the thoughts that a person has is causing God, who is the king, to be held captive, which means even the divine holy Shekhinah, God's divine presence, is in exile as a result of what we are thinking about. Meaning we are causing a spiritual exile of God's divine Shekhinah through our mind, through our thoughts, through our negative, not only our actions, but also our thoughts. The Tanya now offers another illustration of how you cause the Shekhinah to be exiled through inappropriate use of your soul. For God's portion is his people, Yaakov, his allotted, or chevel and nachalato, his allotted inheritance. This is a quote from Moses on his last day of his life, which in Hebrew is Yaakov Chevel Nachalot. Yaakov is the portion of his people, his allotted inheritance. Yaakov, Jacob, is the Chevel Nachalato. Let's see what that means. The unusual use of the term Chevel here, which usually refers to a rope, invites interpretation. Rashi writes, what does this verse mean? Rashi says that Yaakov is the third of the patriarchs. He is endowed with a threefold merit. The merit of his grandfather, which was Abraham, the merit of his father, which is Yitzchak, and his own merit, totaling three, like a rope composed of three strands. So you have a strand that on itself is not strong. But when you have three strands that together blends together to make a rope, Yaakov, who has the merits of his grandfather and his father and his own merit, is like this rope of the inheritance. So that's the connection between Yaakov, Jacob, our patriarch, and a rope. The Tanya offers another idea. That's where Rashi says. But now Tanya says another idea behind the rope as referring to the connection of the soul, God's portion with God. Just as when you pull a rope, a chevel, the other end follows, so too when you sin, you drag holy energy into an impure place. And this idea will be elaborated upon in Tanya later on in the Igeres HaTeshuvah. But this is a very powerful idea. And this enmeshment of the holy soul in an inappropriate activity is the secret of the Shekhinah's exile. And see chapter 17. The Tanya discerns this idea through creatively reinterpreting a verse in scripture. So just to explain one concept, I didn't bring a rope with me, but if you have a rope, the way it works is when you pull the rope down, the top gets lowered also. That's just the way a rope works. You pull, the whole thing, even the top of it gets lowered. What the connection over here is, us Jewish people, we have the ability, and it's a negative thing, but it brings about us compassion for God's holy Shekhinah. When we do a negative act, it's putting our soul into exile. But the step that we're taking now is in this section of Tanya, we're saying that it's also putting God's holy Shekhinah into exile, because we're lowering it by our action. It's also going to be lowering the divine Shekhinah, which means the top of the rope, which is where we come from. God's holy Shekhinah is being lowered through our negative action, meaning we are connected to God by this rope. So when our soul, which is the lower part of the rope, is being lowered into the impurities of this world, it's causing also the top of the rope, which is God's divine Shekhinah, to be lowered as well. Absolutely, yeah, exactly, and that's going to be the power of teshuvah. What's amazing actually is just continuing along this theme of the rope later on, which is going to be in Igeres HaTeshuvah, which is what he's quoting over here. It's going to be elaborated in chapter 5 and 6 of the Igeres HaTeshuvah. He says a beautiful concept there, even though it's not really related to here, but we'll mention it nonetheless, that there are certain sins that a person could do that sever their connection between them and God. In Hebrew, it's called kares, which means cut off. What happens is every sin we do, if you have a rope that's made up of, let's say, I don't know, 500 strands, or 613 strands is the way the Torah looks at it. That rope is our connection with God. Every time a sin is, God forbid, committed, a strand of that rope is being cut off. Eventually it could sever the connection between God and the Jewish person, God forbid. But what's beautiful is the power of teshuvah is when you have a rope that's cut off and then it's retied. What happens when you retie a cut knot, a cut rope through a knot, it actually shortens the rope. The rope now becomes shorter because the knot is tied in middle, so the top and the bottom come closer together. Through teshuvah, it has the power of actually bringing the rope, which means the bottom of the rope and the top of the rope, which means the Jew, and God, which is at the top, brings them closer together, which is exactly part of that analogy of the rope. It has the negative that it could be cut, and also the idea of what we're saying over here in Tanya, that you lower the divine Shekhinah, but also the positive, that number one, you could raise it up, and number two, that you also create a deeper connection through teshuvah. So that's going to be elaborated in chapter 5 of Igeres HaTeshuvah, in a different section of that. So it brings about the exile of God's holy Shekhinah, divine presence. The Tanya discerns this idea through creatively reinterpreting a verse in Scripture. Let's see what the verse is. It's from Isaiah. This is the idea behind the verse. And let him return to God. The Yashuv el Hashem. We say this on Yom Kippur several times. V'irachamehu, and he will, meaning God, will have compassion for him. Literally, this means that if you return to God through repentance, in Hebrew teshuvah, God will have mercy on him, the person. That's usually how it's interpreted. But as is typical in Hasidic exegesis, as I say, like exegesis, I think, the Tanya inverts the meaning of the verse to read he, which means instead of it referring to God, it's the person will have compassion for him, which is God. So the simple meaning is that God, when through the performance of tshuva, God will have compassion on the person. But over here, the way Hasidus or Tanya is reinterpreting it is that the person will have compassion on God. What does that mean? That sounds inappropriate. What does it mean, a person having compassion on God? So let's see further in Tanya. It's because you feel sorry for God, whose holy spark in your soul has become dragged into sin, that you decided to return to God. You have great compassion for God's name, which rests with us even when we act inappropriately. As the verse states, he rests with them amid their impurity. And that's from Leviticus. So this is a beautiful reinterpretation of a verse where it talks about tshuva, that God will have compassion on us. It doesn't say God, it just says he will have compassion on him. So the way we're reinterpreting it is not that God will have compassion on the person, but rather the person will, through his performance of a mitzvah, he's having compassion on God, because God's Shekhinah has been exiled through the performance of a negative act or a negative thought, and you're lowering that divine spark into the depths of klipa. Through teshuvah, you're raising it up, which means you're freeing, you're redeeming, and you're bringing light onto the divine Shekhinah that has been dragged into sin. That is an incredible compassion for God. So when you're doing a mitzvah, if you contemplate on that, not about the love, which is the meditation we've had before, and about the reverence, but rather upon the Shekhinah that you are freeing through your act, that you are freeing through your speech, through your prayer, through your blessing, that you are freeing through your appropriate and holy thoughts, you're redeeming the Shekhinah. That's a compassion that you have on your soul, a compassion that you're having on the Shekhinah, God's divine presence. And that's an incredible meditation to think about when you're doing a mitzvah, which means it makes you do the mitzvah with more alacrity, with more energy, and with more knowing that your act is actually bringing a great comfort and a freedom to the Shekhinah and to your soul every time you're doing that mitzvah, which is an amazing thing. Okay, section 3, how to achieve intimacy with God. Above, the Tanya mentioned that compassion is the emotional attribute associated with our father, Yaakov, Jacob. In Hasidic thought, the patriarchs, which were Abraham, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, were the embodiment of spiritual energies, and their life events caused fundamental shifts in the way these energies are available to us. The Tanya now unveils the biblical secret of compassion energy as expressed through one of the actions of Yaakov. Let me just read a Hasidic thought before we continue with section 3. So I'm just going to read this one thought coming up on the bottom of 585 if you're looking inside. Your soul is sacred and pure. Before it was placed in your body, it was one with God. Now that sacred, precious soul is trapped in a physical body. Thoughts such as these ought to arouse compassion for your soul. I find that to be a beautiful thing. Okay. Now, continuing on section 3, we're going to learn from an act of Yaakov, a biblical secret of how this compassion energy is expressed. Okay, so let's see a story of Yaakov. This is the mystical meaning of the verse. It's actually going to be in next week's Torah portion. And Yaakov kissed Rachel. He lifted his voice and he cried. The story is when Yaakov had to run away from his evil brother, his twin brother, whose name was Esav, which is at the end of this week's Torah portion, where Yaakov received the blessings from Yitzchak, his father, instead of Esav. Esav wanted to kill him. So Yaakov had to run away, flee for his life, and he went to his uncle, Rivka, his mother's brother, whose name was Lavan. And while before meeting Lavan, he was by the well, which is the romantic place where all of our Jewish leaders have met their brides. Moses also met his wife over there. And while he was at the well, he sees Rachel coming. He knew that they're soulmates. He knew that she was the other half of his soul. And he kissed her, knowing that he's going to be marrying her. And he lifted his voice and he cried. That's the story of the Torah. First, the Tanya will identify the spiritual energies represented by Rachel and Yaakov respectively. Okay, so we're going to understand what is happening over here. Is he going to go into the kiss? He's going to go into the crying, but let me just speed up a little bit. I don't know if he goes into the kiss part, because if someone runs up to another person on the street and kisses them, you call the cops. So over here, Yaakov is kissing Rachel. There's obviously a lot of Kabbalistic and mystical ideas going on. So let's see what some of these Kabbalah happenings are. Since Rachel represents the spiritual energy referred to by the Zohar as Knesset Yisrael, the source of all the souls, and Yaakov is a supernal paradigm, in his supernal paradigm, is a reflection of the divine energy of compassion in the world of Atzilus, the world of divine attribute. So each of these members, which is Yaakov and Rachel, Jacob and Rachel, are playing a role of spiritual energy. Rachel is representing the souls of all the souls of the Jewish people. In Hebrew, it's known as Knesset Yisrael, the assembly of Israel, the souls where the Jewish people are sourced. And Yaakov is the spiritual energy of compassion, the way it is in the supernal world of Atzilus. So when Yaakov lifted his voice and he cried, what does this mean in the spiritual model where Yaakov represents divine compassion and Rachel is representing our souls? Yaakov stirs great compassion for her, and he lifted his voice upwards to the source of supernal compassion, which is called the Father of all compassionate source. The somewhat limited compassion of the world of Atzilus is insufficient to redeem the souls from their exile. Yaakov must arouse great compassion for our souls from the source of compassion, which is truly unlimited. In order to do this, he must lift up his voice and reach to a higher source. So just to express what we're saying, Yaakov comes from a place of compassion. It's called the compassion in the world of Atzilut, which is the highest world. But even at that level of where he is at, which is compassion in the world of Atzilus, it's not enough to secure compassion for the souls of Israel. So in order to really bring compassion to their souls, he needs to lift himself up to a higher place, which means he's reaching up even above his own expression of compassion to a higher place. So that's where the verse says he lifted his voice and cried, which means to get that compassion, he's lifting his voice. He's going to a higher place to reach to a higher source. But merely reaching the higher source is not enough. He must then pull down that energy onto the soul. So one is to reach it. The other is to draw it forth. So how does he draw it forth? Through his crying. So that's the next word of the verse. And he cried to stir up and subsequently pull down from there great compassion on all the souls and on their source, Knesset Yisrael. Okay, so let's pause there for a second. Let's explain a little bit of what's going on. I don't know how many of you ever heard a child cry, but when you do, it's a pierce that you right away want to solve what's going on. So a child could nag, they could fetch, kind of ignore them. You say, okay, no problem. But then when they cry, it's like, okay, what do you need? So the crying has the ability to draw forth the energy that is needed at that time. Yaakov, it wasn't enough that Yaakov was reaching to a place of compassion, because it's one thing to reach it, but by his crying, he was now drawing it forth to the place that he needed to bring it to, which was to the souls of Israel. So again, let's start from the beginning. We have the model of Yaakov and Rachel. Yaakov meeting Rachel for the first time, he lifts up his voice and he cries. Why was he crying? So Rashi explains because he realized that they're not going to be buried together, and that was a place of sadness for him. So right away, the first time he met her, he was already thinking that, oh my gosh, with all the years we're going to live together, which actually wasn't that many, because Rachel died in her mid-30s, but still, they're not going to be buried together. That caused him a great amount of grief. But the deeper meaning, the way we're learning here in Kabbalah, is that Yaakov is representing the model of divine energy, the Shekhinah. Rachel is representing the souls of the Jewish people. Yaakov wanted to secure for the souls of the Jewish people a great deal of compassion for the exile of our souls. How does he do that? By lifting up his voice. Yaakov already, by the model of Yaakov is representing compassion, the highest of worlds Atzilus. Like I told you before, Avram is representing love. Yitzchak is representing justice and gevura, awe and reverence, discipline. Yaakov is representing the combination of both of them, which we're saying is compassion. So Yaakov already is compassion. But to bring about compassion for the souls of the Jewish people, it isn't enough the compassion of his source, which is in the world of Atzilus. He needed to raise up to a higher place. So by the verse saying Yaakov lifting up his voice and crying, lifting up his voice is to reach to a higher place of compassion, even higher than his own source. And crying is not only to lift up and reach that higher source of compassion, but it's also to bring it down so that it could be appreciated and felt by the souls of Israel. So there's one thing to reach it, but there's another thing to supply it and to nurture the place that you're trying to bring it to. So by Yaakov crying, that's the next step, which is actually feeding this high source of compassion to the souls of Israel. Hope that's clear. Okay, hope you can see the screen where it should be at the top of the page. Finally, we learned the specific purpose of this compassion. Right, is that where we're up to? Yeah, we're on the bottom of 586 if you're looking inside. To lift the souls, what was the purpose? Not only to bring it down, but to lift up their souls, to lift the souls up from their exile and to merge and unite them above with the blessed infinite light. The souls have been exiled due to bodily incarnation in general, as well as sin. When Yaakov, which is the compassion of Atzilus, lifts his voice and arouses a limitless divine compassion from the source of compassion, the souls are reconnected with the blessed infinite light from which they have been exiled. This is the mystical meaning of An Yaakov Kisra, or Rachel. The souls will be deeply connected with blessed infinite light in a manner of kissing mouth to mouth, which is a merging of spirit with spirit, which is a quote from the Zohar, Rucha Berucha, which is Aramaic for spirit and spirit. As the verse states from Song of Songs, which is the metaphor of the love between God and the Jewish people, let him kiss me with the kisses of the mouth. The Torah depicts the deep union of the souls with the blessed infinite light as kissing, just as a physical kiss represents a profound bond of spirit between one individual and another. So hold on one second. Just a few quick quotes. Maybe I mentioned this before, and if I did, you guys could stop me. But Rabbi Akiva, did I talk about Rabbi Akiva last week? Does that sound familiar? Okay, so there's 24 books in the Torah. Okay, good. So Rabbi Akiva said that the Song of Songs is considered the Holy of Holies. Why is the Song of Songs considered the Holy of Holies? In fact, many of the rabbis thought that maybe not that it's inappropriate for a Song of Songs to be included in the Tanakh, in the 24 books. Why shouldn't it be included? Because it's a love song. It's a love poem between a bride and a groom. But once they understood that it's actually the metaphor of the love between God and the Jewish people, they realized and appreciated Rabbi Akiva's statement about the Song of Songs. Rabbi Akiva's statement is that it's Kodesh Kodashim, Holy of Holies, is the book of Song of Songs. So this book of Song of Songs talks about that he kisses her, what's the expression from, with the kisses of the mouth. Let him kiss me with the kisses of the mouth. Yeshakeni minashikas piu. The kiss of the mouth is one of connection of spirit, breath and breath. It's an absolute whole special moment of connection and intimacy. In spiritual significance, it's the deep bond between God and the Jewish people that's connecting our spirit with the spirit of God, which is the blessed infinite light. So basically, it's a spiritual kiss that is the place of infinity. That our souls are connecting with God in an infinite capacity, which is an amazing thing. By Yaakov kissing Rachel spiritually, that is symbolizing the raising up of the souls of Israel, which is symbolized by Rachel. That kiss is lifting us up through the compassion that he secures for us. He's lifting us up to the place of a connection of the souls and the blessed infinite light. So just parenthetically, many times it's brought in the good books that the act of intimacy between bride and groom, between husband and wife, is the holiest of holy. It's unlike in other religions where it's considered to be bad or coarse. In Jewish tradition, it's actually considered the holiest of times. So even a kiss, it says it's brought in Torah in different places that a kiss is considered holy to the point where it actually creates angels every time. There's a beautiful story of the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe, who he was born in 1860. Actually, his birthday was just last week on the 21st of Cheshvan, from 1860, Tafresh Chaf Aleph. 5621 is his birth year. And when he was a young father, he was studying with someone else in his home. And his young child, who later became the sixth Chabad Rebbe, was sleeping. And he had such a precious, pure look. And he said, "Look how innocent and pure my child is sleeping." And he was tempted to kiss him. But he said, "You know what? Instead of a simple kiss, I'm going to give him I'm going to gift him a Hasidic teaching, a Hasidic discourse known as a Maimon." And right then and there, he wrote a Hasidic discourse that when his child grew older, he gave him this discourse, and he said, "This is the Hasidic form of a kiss." So you could just see the comparison. A mimer, which is the deep teachings of Hasidus that the fifth Chabad Rebbe was teaching, he connected that and he compared that to a kiss. So you could just see the holy and sublime energy a kiss has. So over here, with the story of the Torah, which seems to be a crazy story of Yaakov meeting this girl for the first time, running up to her by the well and kissing her, the way the Hasidus, the Kabbalistic approach to it is that he saw in her, he was symbolizing the compassion of the divine energy coming from the place of Atzilus. And he saw in her the reservoir, the storage, the treasure of all the souls of Israel. So he lifted his voice and cried, which is crying is the idea of compassion. Lifting his voice is to get compassion from an even higher source where he came from, which was Atzilus, which is the highest world. But he was trying to tap into the infinite source of compassion, which is higher. And crying is to now bring it down. Like I said before, a kid crying, he or she secures what he wants to make sure he gets it. So Yaakov crying was making sure that it now will be drawn forth to the souls of Israel. And then kissing her after is not only bringing it down to the soul, but also lifting the soul up to reach this place of connection of spirit and spirit with the blessed infinite light. But yeah, again, if someone on the street runs up to you and tries to kiss you and say it's a Kabbalistic idea, you could call the cops. Practically speaking, how is this bond achieved? So back in the text, and the Kindle is toward the top. In the book, it's on 587 toward the middle. This kissing refers to the connection of a person's spoken word with the words of God, which is halach. How do we now achieve this kiss? Which means, metaphorically speaking, it's through Yaakov. But nowadays, we don't have Yaakov kissing Rachel. So how do we achieve this kiss and this connection with the blessed light? It's through studying Torah, specifically which parts of Torah. It's the halacha, which is Jewish life. And so too his thoughts with God's thoughts, and his actions with God's actions, namely the practical mitzvahs. So we're going to skip, if you see a star on the Kindle, it's because at the bottom of the book on 587, there's a footnote, but we're not going to read the footnote now because it's not It doesn't even exist in the text on the Kindle, so we're just going to skip it for now. But the good news is, chapter 45 is actually a really short chapter, and we're, God willing, going to finish today. So let's see it inside. Now, the Tanya briefly addresses the question: are all mitzvahs equal? Of course, they equally represent the divine will, but do some offer a more intimate connection with God than others? This is such a classic question. I was actually just debating this with my kids last night. Do you make a difference in which sin a person is committing, or in which mitzvah a person is performing, or are they all equal? So let's see. All the mitzvahs provide an intimate connection with God, but this is especially so with acts of charity and kindness, since kindness is God's right arm, and that is literally at the level of hugging. Remember, I told you before that kindness or love is on the right side, and that is literally at the level of hugging, like it says, as the verse states, and his right arm hugs. So again, from that same Song of Songs, it says the left arm pushes away, the right arm hugs. The right arm is always stronger. So while every mitzvah deepens a connection between God and the Jewish person, there are specific mitzvahs that have a more intense, intimate connection. And the mitzvah over here, he's saying, is an act of kindness. When a person gives charity, it's the right side, which is a more intense hugging than any other part of the body. Let's see it inside. Charity is metaphorically associated with God's right arm to illustrate the particular intimate connections it brings, analogous to a hug. This is the unique quality of acts of charity and kindness not shared with any other mitzvah. While above in chapter 4, page 74, all mitzvahs were depicted as a hug with God, the Tanya emphasizes here that charity is literally, or mamish, at the level of hugging, meaning that it expresses a bond of hugging to a far greater extent. So not so important to analyze the details here, but the general idea here is every mitzvah is a deep connection with God, but the mitzvah of charity, which is symbolizing the right part, the right arm of God, intensifies and deepens the connection with God in an intimate way more than by any other mitzvah. And Torah study, which is verbalized and studied with intense concentration, is literally on the level of kissing God. As we have just learned, all mitzvahs are on a level of kissing God, but Torah study is literally mamish on the level of kissing God. Presumably, this is because Torah study is both verbalized and studied. So there is an intimate bond to God through the body and the mind. And through this process of meditation described in this chapter, arousing compassion on your soul, and you can come to the experience of great love palpably in your heart. When you arouse great compassion from the source of all compassion, you are accessing an extremely powerful energy. It can even propel you to the level of great love. As we have learned, great love always comes as a gift from above and not as a direct result of your spiritual work. Here, the gift is prompted by your compassion, meditations, and your charitable acts. We know that compassion, the trait of Yaakov, can lead to love, which is the trait of Abraham, as the verse states, to Yaakov, who redeemed Abraham, as it explained elsewhere in chapter 32. So just to end this, and we'll summarize this also, but make sure it's clear. Compassion has the power to redeem love, to save you from a state where love eludes you. If your soul's flame is weak and you're finding it difficult to arouse any love for God, try compassion, which is a beautiful thing. So let's just analyze the idea we're learning here. Just going to go back a little bit inside. Over here, the meditation, let's just explain this a little bit this way. Over here, the meditation we're coming to in chapter 45 is short and sweet. It's one chapter or short chapter that I think it must be a record that we learned the whole chapter in on one Wednesday morning, which is pretty cool. Because the idea is simple and relatable without too deep of a meditation. The meditation is just think about where my soul is coming from and how low my soul had to extend in order to get here. And through my acts that are inappropriate, through my speech that is inappropriate, or through my thoughts that are inappropriate, my soul is feeling in exile. My soul is feeling stuck and lost in a shackle. The same is also not only the soul is feeling in exile, but also the divine spark of God. Hey, Alex, let's stop her over there so you could just get started, and we're almost done here. Be with you soon. Thank you. Boker tov. Nice to see you, Alex. So the same is also the divine Shekhinah, which is God's divine presence, is also feeling that it's in a state of spiritual decline. It's being lowered like the rope. That every time you lower the bottom of the rope, the top of the rope is also being lowered. The same is also with the Shekhinah of God, that is being lowered. So when I'm performing a mitzvah and I realize that my mitzvah is able to now raise up the divine Shekhinah from its place of exile, that it's feeling languishing in a dungeon, and now you're lifting it up, you're redeeming it, that causes a great joy. It causes a compassion and a redemption for the soul. So that compassion has an incredible ability to lift up the soul and lift up the divine Shekhinah through my doing a mitzvah. The Alter Rebbe also over here explained this idea of the rope by the flow of the mind. That the king is captive, the king is lost or being captive by the flow of the mind. What we're thinking about, you may think, who cares? It's my thoughts. It's a free country. I can think what I want. Comes along Torah and Tanya and Chassidus and tells you, you should know that your thought matter. Your thought is causing your soul to be in exile, and your thoughts can also cause the divine Shekhinah to be in exile. So when I change my thoughts, when I change my speech, or when I do an act of a mitzvah, I'm lifting up the divine Shekhinah to be free, to be unshackled. Through when you have this great compassion, it propels you to doing the mitzvah with more joy, with more excitement, knowing that I'm lifting up the divine Shekhinah from its spiritual exile. Okay, so now we go into the story of Yaakov and Rachel. When Yaakov kissed Rachel, he first lifted his voice and cried. So Rashi says he lifted his voice because he saw and cried because they're not going to be buried together. Chassidus explains a much deeper level that he lifted his voice because Yaakov symbolizes the divine energy of God. Rachel is symbolizing the spiritual souls of the Jewish people. Yaakov lifting his voice is he's eliciting compassion from a place that is even higher than Yaakov. Yaakov comes from the place of Atzilus, which is the place of compassion. But lifting his voice is reaching to a place that even is higher than his own source. And crying is to bring it, to draw it forth to the Jewish people, to their souls. So that was the lifting up his voice and crying. But then when he kisses her, it's not enough to bring it down to them. He's trying to lift them up to have a spiritual connection of spirit to spirit, of kiss between God and the Jewish people, and more specifically between the souls of the Jewish people and God's divine infinite light. That was in the story, the symbol of the story. How do we do that now? Through studying Torah, specifically when we study Jewish law. And when we perform, let's go that. And when we perform a mitzvah, a practical mitzvah, something in practice, which means you can meditate on it. But when you actually perform it, you're now connecting your soul with God's infinite light. That's a direct connection with God. Especially there are certain mitzvahs that we do that have a deeper, intimate connection. One is the acts of kindness and charity. That even though every mitzvah is considered to be an intimate connection with God, the mitzvah of charity is considered, like God says, it's on my right side. So when we do an act of charity, it's like intensifying the right side, which is stronger, like we explained before, like by most people. So when we give charity, it's intensifying this connection, like a kiss between a bride and a groom is the kiss between God and the Jewish people through the performance of this mitzvah of charity. Also is through the study of Torah, because by Torah study, it connects your mind and your mouth also because you're speaking the words. And when you have this compassion on your soul, it's able to also bring you to the place of Ava Rabbah, which we explained in the previous chapters, is the place of great love that is a gift from God. But how could you earn this great gift? Through this compassion. So when you meditate on this compassion, that your divine soul and God's divine Shekhinah is in exile, and through you doing this mitzvah, you're freeing it. That brings you to also not only the compassion, but it also brings you to a place of great love. Let's do the practical lesson on 588, and then we'll go back to the screen for, I think, you know what, I guess it'll be inside also. Let me just pull it up on the screen then. Oh yeah, right here, practical lessons. Contemplate how far your soul has fallen. from its origin in God to your lowly body. Compassion for your soul will infuse your mitzvot with authentic emotion for God. This meditation will empower you to connect to God with every mitzvah as an intimate bond, a kiss. It is also a path that can bring you to Avarabba, great love, through your performance of the mitzvah. All right, I think that ends chapter 46. We did it, guys. Amazing. All right, next week, God willing, we'll be on chapter 40. That was chapter 45. We'll be on chapter 46. Awesome. All right, thank you, everybody. Have a great day, Adrian. Bye, Vivian. Bye, Robin. Bye, Lynn. And bye, Shira and Thomas.
Thank you, Rabbi. Goodbye,
You're welcome.
everyone.
Goodbye, everyone. Have a great day.
I got